The Histories, by Herodotus. Introduction. Imagine, for a moment, that you are the richest man in the world. Not just wealthy, but so colossally rich that for the next 2,500 years, your name will be the very definition of wealth. People will say as rich as, and then, they will say your name. You command a vast and prosperous kingdom. You have loyal subjects, a beautiful family, and palaces filled with more gold than most people could ever dream of. By any measure, you are the happiest man alive. Or are you? One day, a wise man visits your court. His name is Solon, and he is known throughout the world for his wisdom. You show him your treasuries, your armies, your seemingly limitless power, and you ask him a simple question: have you ever met a happier man than I? You expect him to flatter you, of course. But he doesn't. Instead, he tells you stories of ordinary men who lived simple lives, served their city, raised good children, and died with honor. You are confused, even a little angry. What about your wealth, your power? Solon looks at you with a gentle but firm gaze and gives you a warning that will echo through the ages: count no man happy until he is dead. That king's name was Croesus. And in the years that followed, he would learn the terrible truth of that warning. He would lose his beloved son in a tragic accident. He would lead his empire into a disastrous war, misinterpreting a prophecy that told him he would destroy a great empire, never imagining it would be his own. He would lose his kingdom, his wealth, and his freedom, and finally find himself a prisoner, tied to a great wooden pyre, with flames licking at his feet. And in that moment of ultimate despair, with everything he held dear turned to ash, he screamed out a name. Not the name of a god, not the name of his wife or children, but the name of the one man who had told him the truth: Solon, Solon, Solon. This incredible story, of the rise and fall of a great king, is just the opening act of one of the most important books ever written. Today, we're diving into the Histories by Herodotus. This isn't just a book, it is the birth of history itself. Written over 2,400 years ago, it is the first great work of non-fiction, a sprawling, ambitious, and wildly entertaining attempt to understand the world and the great clash of civilizations that defined its time, the epic war between the tiny, divided states of Greece and the mighty Persian Empire. Herodotus, the man who wrote it, is known as the father of history, but he was so much more than that. He was an explorer, a journalist, an anthropologist, and one of the greatest storytellers who ever lived. His book has sold countless copies over millennia and has shaped the very way we think about our past. Today, I'm going to share with you the timeless wisdom hidden within its pages. We'll journey from the courts of powerful kings to the battlefields where the fate of the world was decided. And by the end, you'll understand not just the story of an ancient war, but a deeper lesson about human nature, the cycles of fortune, and the endless, fascinating dance between fate and free will. Book summary. Our journey begins not with grand armies, but with small, personal stories that ripple outwards to change the world. Herodotus wants us to understand that history isn't just a series of dates and battles, it's a collection of human choices, of passions, mistakes, and ambitions. Think of the story of Gyges and King Candaeus of Lydia. Candaeus was a king so obsessed with his wife's beauty that he believed she was the most beautiful woman in the world. But it wasn't enough for him to believe it, he needed someone else to see it too. He had a trusted bodyguard named Gyges, and one day, the king made a fateful proposition. "Gyges," he said, "you must see her naked. I'll hide you in our bedroom, and you can watch as she undresses." Gyges was horrified. He knew that to look upon the queen naked was a violation that could only end in death. He begged the king to reconsider, but Candaeus was insistent. Cornered, Gyges agreed. He hid behind the door as the queen entered and disrobed. But as he slipped away, she caught a glimpse of him. She knew instantly that her husband had betrayed her. The next morning, she summoned Gyges. Her voice was cold as ice. "You have two choices," she told him. "Either you kill Candules, take me as your wife, and become king yourself. Or you will die right here, right now. One of you must perish, the man who plotted this shame, or the man who saw it." Gyges, realizing he was trapped, chose to live. That night, in the very room where he had committed his crime, he killed his king, married the queen, and took the throne of Lydia. A single act of private vanity and obsession led to the fall of a dynasty and the rise of a new one. This is Herodotus's way of teaching us a fundamental lesson. The grand movements of history often begin with the quiet whispers of human desire and folly. The new dynasty founded by Gyges would eventually lead to his descendant, Croesus, the very king we met at the beginning, who learned the hard way about the unpredictability of fortune. Croesus, after losing his kingdom to the rising power of Persia under its brilliant founder, Cyrus the Great, became a captive advisor in the Persian court. He had learned his lesson, and now it was his turn to be the wise counselor. Herodotus uses this transition to shift our focus from the small kingdom of Lydia to the colossal, world-spanning Persian Empire. He wants to understand its origins, its power, and the customs of the many peoples it ruled. This is where the book truly opens up, and Herodotus transforms from a historian into the world's first great travel writer and anthropologist. He doesn't just tell you about Persia, he takes you on a tour of the known world. His curiosity is boundless. He travels to Egypt and is mesmerized. "Egypt," he writes, "is a land which boasts an inordinate number of wonders, and possesses more monuments surpassing description than any other in the world." Reason enough, then, to describe it at some length. And he does. He tells us of the Nile, a river that behaves like no other, flooding in the summer and feeding the entire land. He describes the construction of the Great Pyramids, marveling at the sheer human effort required to build them. He details the strange and fascinating customs of the Egyptians, how their women go to the market while the men weave at home, how they worship animals, and how they mummify their dead with meticulous care. He journeys, through his sources, to the wild lands of Scythia, in what is now Ukraine and southern Russia. He describes these nomadic warriors who live on horseback, drink fermented mare's milk, and have fierce, freedom-loving customs that make them impossible to conquer. He tells us tales from the edges of the world, of Indian tribes who collect gold from the nests of giant ants, of griffins that guard treasure in the mountains, of lands so far north that the air is filled with feathers, or what he wisely guesses is actually snow. Through all these incredible digressions, Herodotus is building a picture of the world as a vast tapestry of different cultures, each with its own unique ways of life. And in doing so, he arrives at one of the most profound and tolerant insights in all of literature. He tells the story of the Persian king Darius, who, to illustrate a point, summoned some Greeks to his court. "How much money," Darius asked them, "would it take for you to eat the bodies of your dead fathers?" The Greeks were horrified. They replied that no amount of money could ever make them do such a monstrous thing. Then, Darius brought in some men from an Indian tribe called the Colantians, who had the custom of ritually eating their deceased parents. Through an interpreter, so the Greeks could understand, Darius asked them, "How much money would it take for you to burn the bodies of your dead fathers?" The Colantians cried out in horror, begging him not to speak of such an impiety. Herodotus reflects on this. Everyone, he concludes, believes his own customs to be by far and away the best. From this, it follows that only a madman would think to jeer at such matters. And then he delivers a line that has resonated for centuries: "Custom is the king of all." This wasn't just an abstract observation for Herodotus. It was the key to understanding the great conflict that was brewing. The Persian Empire, vast and multicultural as it was, was still ruled by a single man, the great king, whose word was law and whose subjects were, in a sense, his slaves. The Greeks, on the other hand, were a collection of tiny, quarrelsome city-states, but they cherished a radical new idea: freedom. The freedom to govern themselves, to speak their minds, and to live not as subjects, but as citizens. It was this fundamental difference in worldview, this clash of customs, that would eventually lead to war. The spark that lit the flame was the Ionian Revolt. The Greek cities along the coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, which had been conquered by Persia, rose up in rebellion. Their leader, a man named Aristogoras of Miletus, sailed to mainland Greece to ask for help. First, he went to Sparta, the most formidable military power in Greece. He brought with him a bronze tablet, a map of the known world, a marvel of its time. He showed the Spartan king, Cleomenes, the vast lands of the Persian Empire. "These people," Aristogoras said, "are not fighters. They wear trousers and soft caps into battle. They are rich in gold and silver, yours for the taking. Help us, and you can be masters of Asia." Cleomenes listened patiently and asked a single, practical question: how long does it take to travel from the coast to the Persian capital? Aristogoras, in a moment of fatal honesty, replied, 3 months. Cleomenes cut him off. "My friend from Miletus," he said, "you are to leave Sparta before sunset. A 3 months' journey? You are asking the Spartans to march 3 months away from the sea. The idea is ridiculous," and he sent him away. But Aristogoras didn't give up. He went to Athens, a city that had recently overthrown its own tyrants and was buzzing with the new energy of democracy. He made the same speech, but this time, he wasn't speaking to a cautious king. He was speaking to the assembly of the people. As Herodotus wryly observes, it seems to be easier to fool 30,000 people than a single man. The Athenians, moved by the plea of their Ionian kin and perhaps tempted by the promise of glory, agreed to help. They sent 20 ships. Herodotus marks this moment with a somber tone. "These ships," he writes, "were the beginning of the evils that would befall both the Greeks and the barbarians." The Ionian revolt was eventually crushed by the Persians, but the involvement of Athens had infuriated the new Persian king, Darius. The story goes that he shot an arrow into the sky and prayed, "Zeus, grant that I may punish the Athenians," and he ordered a servant to stand before him at every meal and repeat 3 times, "Master, remember the Athenians." The first act of that revenge came in 490 BC. Darius sent a fleet across the Aegean Sea with a single mission: to burn Athens and Eretria to the ground and enslave their people. The Persians landed on the coast of Attica, at a wide, flat plain called Marathon. The Athenians were in a state of panic. Their army was vastly outnumbered. They sent a runner, Philippides, on a desperate mission to Sparta to beg for help. He ran the 150 miles in just 2 days, an incredible feat of endurance. But the Spartans, in the middle of a religious festival, said they could not march until the moon was full. The Athenians were on their own. Their 10 generals were divided. Half argued that it was madness to fight such a superior force. The other half, led by a brilliant and daring commander named Miltiades, insisted that they must fight for their freedom. The deciding vote fell to the war archon, Callimachus. Miltiades went to him and made a passionate plea. "It is in your power now, Callimachus," he said, "to condemn Athens to slavery, or to make her free. Never before have the Athenians faced a graver peril." Miltiades won him over. The decision was made to fight. The Athenian army, a force of perhaps 10,000 hoplites, marched out to face the Persian host. When the Persians saw them coming, they prepared for an easy victory. The Athenians had no cavalry, no archers, just a line of foot soldiers. To the Persians, it seemed like a suicide mission. Then the Athenians did something no Greek army had ever done before. They charged. They ran the entire mile of open ground between the two armies, a river of bronze shields and flashing spears, crashing into the Persian lines with unbelievable force. The battle raged for hours. The center of the Athenian line, which was deliberately thin, broke under the pressure of the elite Persian troops. But the Athenian flanks, which were much stronger, crushed their opponents and then wheeled inwards, enveloping the Persian center in a deadly trap. The Persian army shattered. They turned and fled back to their ships, with the Athenians in hot pursuit, hacking them down as they ran. By the end of the day, over 6,000 Persians lay dead on the plain of Marathon. The Athenians had lost only 192 men. It was an impossible victory, a triumph that sent a shockwave through the Greek world. A small city of free men had faced the might of the world's greatest empire and had won. A runner was dispatched back to Athens to deliver the news. He ran the 26 miles without stopping, burst into the city square, gasped out the single word Nike, victory ? And then collapsed and died. But the victory at Marathon was only a temporary reprieve. A decade later, the Persians returned. Darius was dead, but his son, Xerxes, had inherited his father's ambition and his desire for revenge. This time, there would be no small expedition. Xerxes assembled the largest army the world had ever seen. Herodotus takes his time describing this incredible force. His numbers are fantastical. He speaks of over 5 million men, an army so vast that it drank rivers dry as it marched. While the exact number is impossible to know, the point is clear. This was an invasion on an unimaginable scale, designed to crush Greece utterly. To move his army from Asia into Europe, Xerxes ordered a bridge of boats to be built across the Hellespont, the strait that separates the two continents. But a great storm rose up and destroyed the bridge. Xerxes, in a fit of hubris, that fatal pride we've seen before, was enraged. He ordered his men to give the Hellespont 300 lashes with a whip and to drop a pair of fetters into the sea, as if to enslave the very water. "O bitter water," his men were commanded to say, "this is done to you by your master as punishment for the wrong you did him." He then had his engineers beheaded and ordered a new, stronger bridge to be built. As his massive army finally began to cross from Asia into Europe, a crossing that took 7 days and 7 nights, Xerxes sat on a marble throne, watching the endless river of men and horses. At the sight of this incredible display of his power, he at first felt blessed. And then, he began to weep. His uncle, Artabanus, was beside him and asked why he was crying. "I was musing," Xerxes replied, "on how short is human life, and the pity of it pierced me through. All these multitudes here, and yet, in 100 years' time, not one of them will be alive." Here again, Herodotus shows us the man behind the crown, the flicker of humanity inside the all-powerful despot, a man capable of grasping the tragic fragility of life even as he leads millions to their potential deaths. As Xerxes' army marched through northern Greece, many Greek states, terrified by its sheer size, surrendered without a fight. They gave the Persian heralds the symbolic gifts of earth and water, signifying their submission. But a small band of cities, led by Sparta and Athens, refused to yield. They formed a Hellenic League, a fragile alliance of free states determined to resist. Their first stand was at a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae. It was the gateway to central Greece, a pass so narrow that only a few men could fight there at a time, neutralizing the Persians' overwhelming numbers. The Greek force sent to hold this pass was tiny, just a few thousand men in total. At its head were 300 elite Spartan warriors, led by their king, Leonidas. When Xerxes arrived and saw the pitifully small force arrayed against him, he laughed. He waited for 4 days, certain they would run away. They didn't. On the 5th day, he sent in his troops. For 2 days, the Greeks held the pass. The Spartans, fighting with breathtaking skill and courage, repelled wave after wave of Persian attacks. The immortals, the elite of the Persian army, were sent in, and they too were driven back with heavy losses. Xerxes, watching from his throne, is said to have leapt to his feet 3 times in terror for his army. The pass, it seemed, was impregnable. But then, a local man named Ephialtes, hoping for a rich reward, showed the Persians a secret path that went around the mountains and came out behind the Greek position. That night, as the Persian immortals made their way along the path, Leonidas learned that he had been betrayed. He knew the end was near. He sent most of the allied Greek army away, telling them to retreat while they still could. But he and his 300 Spartans remained. With them stayed 700 Thespians, who refused to abandon their allies, and a contingent of Thebans, whom Leonidas kept as virtual hostages. As dawn broke, the Greeks at Thermopylae knew they were surrounded. But they did not surrender. Led by Leonidas, they advanced out of the narrowest part of the pass and met the Persians in the open, fighting with a suicidal fury. They fought with their spears until their spears shattered, and then with their swords. Leonidas fell, and a ferocious battle raged over his body until the Greeks finally dragged it back. Pushed back to a small hillock, surrounded on all sides, they fought on. They fought with their daggers, and when their daggers broke, they fought with their bare hands and their teeth, until every last one of them was overwhelmed and killed. The sacrifice at Thermopylae was not in vain. It bought the rest of Greece precious time, and it created a legend that would inspire generations. It showed the world what free men, fighting for their homeland, were capable of. After Thermopylae, the road to Athens was open. The Persian army marched south, and the Athenians, on the advice of their brilliant but cunning leader, Themistocles, abandoned their city. They evacuated their entire population, men, women, and children, to the nearby island of Salamis. The Persians entered an empty Athens and burned the Acropolis, the sacred heart of the city, to the ground. The Greek cause seemed lost. The Persian fleet, a massive armada of over 1,000 ships, was now anchored in the bay near Athens. The much smaller Greek fleet was trapped in the narrow straits between the island of Salamis and the mainland. The Peloponnesian commanders, terrified, wanted to flee to the Isthmus of Corinth and make a last stand there. But Themistocles knew that to fight in the open sea would be suicide. Their only chance was to fight in the narrow confines of the straits, where the Persian numbers would count for nothing. To ensure this happened, he devised a daring and dangerous plan. He sent a trusted slave, Sisinus, to the Persian camp with a secret message for Xerxes. Themistocles, the Athenian commander, the message said, is secretly on your side. He wishes to inform you that the Greeks are in a panic and are planning to escape during the night. If you attack now, you can destroy them all at once. Xerxes, believing the message, fell into the trap. That night, he sent his fleet to block the exits of the straits, surrounding the Greek navy. As dawn broke, the Greeks saw that they were trapped. There was no escape. They had no choice but to fight. The Persian fleet, confident of victory, sailed into the narrow straits. But the confined space quickly turned their greatest strength, their numbers, into a fatal weakness. Their ships became a chaotic, tangled mass, crashing into one another, unable to maneuver. The smaller, more agile Greek triremes darted in and out, ramming and sinking the barbarian vessels. The Battle of Salamis was a slaughter. The Persian fleet was shattered. Xerxes, watching the disaster unfold from his throne on a hillside overlooking the bay, knew he was beaten. He had lost command of the sea, and his vast army, deep in enemy territory, was now vulnerable. Fearing that the Greeks would sail to the Hellespont and destroy his bridges, cutting off his line of retreat, Xerxes decided to flee. He left behind a large portion of his army under the command of his general, Mardonius, with orders to complete the conquest of Greece the following spring. But the heart of the great invasion was broken. The final act of the drama came a year later, in 479 BC. Mardonius, after trying and failing to bribe the Athenians to switch sides, marched his army into Boeotia. The combined Greek army, with the Spartans at its core, finally marched out to meet him. The two forces faced each other on the plain of Plataea. For days, they skirmished, neither side willing to commit to a full-scale battle. But the Persian cavalry constantly harassed the Greek lines, cutting off their supply routes and fouling their water source. Finally, the Greek commander, the Spartan regent Pausanias, decided to move his army to a better position under the cover of night. The withdrawal was chaotic. The various Greek contingents became separated. As dawn broke, Mardonius saw the Greek positions seemingly abandoned and believed they were in full retreat. "They are running away," he cried, and ordered his elite Persian infantry to charge. He charged straight into the Spartans and their Tegean allies, who had been holding their ground. A ferocious battle erupted. The Persians, fighting with incredible bravery, threw themselves against the Spartan shield wall. For a long time, the battle hung in the balance. But the superior armor and longer spears of the Greek hoplites began to tell. Mardonius, riding his white horse in the thick of the fighting, was struck down and killed. With his death, the Persian spirit broke. They turned and fled, and the flight became a rout. The Greeks stormed the Persian camp, and what followed was a massacre. On the very same day, across the Aegean Sea at Mycale, the remnants of the Persian fleet were caught beached on the shore by the Greek navy. The Greeks landed, defeated the Persian land forces guarding the ships, and burned the entire fleet. The great invasion was over. The threat that had hung over Greece for so long was finally lifted. A small collection of city-states, through courage, sacrifice, and a fierce love of freedom, had done the impossible. They had defeated the greatest empire on earth and, in doing so, had ensured the survival of a way of life that would go on to shape the future of the world. Herodotus ends his great work not with a celebration of this victory, but with a quiet, cautionary tale. He tells us that after the war, some Persians came to their king, Cyrus the Great, and made a proposal. "Since we are now masters of a great empire," they said, "let us leave this small and rugged land of ours, and move to a better, more comfortable one." Cyrus listened, and then he gave them a warning. "You may do so," he said, "but prepare yourselves, if you do, to be rulers no more, but to be ruled by others. Soft lands are prone to breed soft men. It is not possible for the same land to produce remarkable crops and men who are hardy in war." The Persians understood. They chose to remain in their harsh homeland and rule, rather than move to a fertile plain and become the slaves of others. It is a fitting end to a story that began with the fall of a king who had grown too comfortable, too certain of his own good fortune. Herodotus's message is clear: greatness is not found in wealth or ease, but in struggle, in courage, and in the hardy spirit of freedom. It is a lesson that was true for the ancient Greeks and Persians, and one that remains just as true for us today. Commentary. So, what do we take away from this incredible journey through the histories? It's a book so vast, so full of stories and ideas, that you can spend a lifetime exploring it. But if I were to boil it down to its essence, to the core lessons that still resonate with us thousands of years later, it would be these. First, Herodotus teaches us the profound power of curiosity. He wasn't content to just record the events of the war. He wanted to understand why it happened. And to do that, he had to understand the people involved, not just the Greeks, but the Persians, the Egyptians, the Scythians. He traveled, he asked questions, he listened. He was driven by a relentless desire to know more about the world and its incredible diversity. In an age where it's so easy to stay within our own bubbles, to listen only to voices that sound like our own, Herodotus's example is a powerful reminder that wisdom begins with an open and curious mind. He shows us that to understand others is not just an academic exercise, it's the first step toward understanding ourselves. The second great lesson is the one he puts into the mouth of Solon and demonstrates through the life of Xerxes, the cycle of human fortune. No state of affairs, no matter how good or how bad, is permanent. Empires rise and fall. The rich become poor, and the poor become rich. The victor in one battle can be the vanquished in the next. Herodotus saw history as a great wheel, constantly turning. This isn't a pessimistic view, it's a realistic one. It's a call for humility in moments of triumph and a source of hope in moments of despair. It reminds us that our success is never guaranteed and that we should never become so arrogant as to believe we are immune to the twists and turns of fate. As Solon said, we must always look to the end. And finally, Herodotus gives us one of the most powerful defenses of freedom ever written. He doesn't just say that freedom is good, he shows us, through his storytelling, what it looks like in action. He contrasts the Persian soldier, who is whipped into battle, with the Greek hoplite, who fights because he is a citizen defending his home. He shows us the creativity, the dynamism, and the sheer, stubborn courage that a free society can unleash. The victory of the Greeks was not just a military triumph, it was a victory of an idea, the idea that ordinary people, when given a stake in their own destiny, can achieve extraordinary things. So, how can you apply these ancient lessons to your own life? Start by cultivating your own sense of Herodotean curiosity. The next time you encounter someone with a different belief, a different background, or a different way of life, don't just judge, ask questions. Listen. Try to understand their world from their perspective. As Herodotus showed, every culture has its own logic, its own wisdom. Second, practice humility. When things are going well, remember the story of Xerxes. Enjoy your success, but don't become attached to it. Understand that life is a series of ups and downs, and that true strength lies not in avoiding failure, but in how you respond to it. And third, cherish your freedom. Whether it's the freedom to speak your mind, to choose your own path, or to participate in the governance of your community, recognize it as the precious and fragile thing that it is. Understand that it's not just a right, but a responsibility to be engaged, to be courageous, and to contribute to the common good. Herodotus began his great work with a simple goal: to ensure that human achievement may be spared the ravages of time. He wanted to preserve the stories of the great deeds and the terrible sufferings he had witnessed, so that future generations might learn from them. More than 2 millennia later, his work endures, not as a dry chronicle of the past, but as a living conversation about the timeless questions of human existence. He teaches us that history is not something that happens to other people. It is our story, the story of our shared struggles, our triumphs, and our endless quest for meaning in a complex and ever-changing world. That was a summary of the Histories by Herodotus. We've explored the grand narrative and touched on some of the most powerful stories today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic happens when you hold the book in your hands. It's in the quiet moments when you get lost in a strange story about Egyptian customs, or feel the tension on the eve of a great battle. This overview is designed to help you decide if this monumental work is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history, it's an experience, a journey into the very dawn of how we tell stories about ourselves, one that can genuinely change the way you see the world. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please consider showing your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue our mission of exploring the great books on the billionaire's bookshelf, so you don't miss our next journey. Let's keep growing together.